The Halifax Explosion by Alan Donald, Yongfang Huang, and Razel Dweck. What was the Halifax Explosion? The Halifax Explosion was a disaster that happened in Halifax, Nova Scotia, Canada. This disaster happened on the morning of December 6, 1917. The Norwegian vessel SS Imo collided with the SS Mont Blanc. Approximately 1,500 people were killed by the blast, debris, fires, or collapsed buildings, and an estimated 9,000 others were injured. This created the largest man-made explosion in history before nuclear weapons. So the Mont Blanc was under orders from the French government to carry her cargo from New York City via Halifax to Bordeaux, France. It collided with the IMO chartered by the Commission for Relief in Belgium to pick up a cargo of relief supplies in New York. On the Mont Blanc, the impact damaged benzol barrels stored on deck, leaking vapors which were ignited by sparks from the collision, setting off a fire on board that quickly grew out of control. Approximately 20 minutes later, at 9:04 a.m., the Mont Blanc exploded. The ship was loaded with nearly 3,000 tons of explosive powder, along with highly flammable oil, gun cotton, benzol, and picric acid. The impact ignited the cargo and the fire began to spread. The crew on board evacuated because they knew how deadly this fire would be. The ship drifted towards the shore with 100-foot flames clawing the sky, and then the nearly 3,000 tons of explosives exploded. The explosion lifted the entire 6 million pounds of the Mont Blanc 1,000 feet into the air, vaporized much of it, and dropped a shower of white-hot shrapnel over Halifax and Dartmouth. A cloud of white smoke rose 20,000 feet into the sky. The remains of the benzol mixed with a cloud of water to form a sticky black rain that fell on both sides of the harbor. A sound wave shot out, and it could be heard more than 200 miles away. An air blast rolled over the city, knocking down buildings, tearing through doors, windows, and walls, crushing bodies, exploding eardrums and lungs, lifting people, snapping trees and telephone wires, reducing whole neighborhoods to rubble. Every building within a mile was destroyed. Then the fire began to spread. 325 acres were totally destroyed, 1,630 buildings annihilated, and 12,000 damaged. More than 1,500 people were killed, leaving behind widows, widowers, orphans, and bereaved parents. Nearly 9,000 people were injured. Ultimately, 41 adults and children were blinded. 249 lost one eye or the sight in it. Many people thought that the Germans had invaded, but really, it was a harbor accident involving a tremendous amount of explosives bound for the European front. Where is Halifax? Halifax is the capital of the Canadian province of Nova Scotia. Right before World War I, the Canadian government began to develop the harbor and waterfront facilities. The outbreak of the war brought Halifax back to prominence. During World War I, Halifax was again an important naval base. This time, the Royal Canadian Navy, in its infancy, patrolled the coast, and the port was a strategic transshipment point for troops mobilized for overseas active service in war-ravaged Europe. The First World War turned Nova Scotia's bustling port of Halifax into a boomtown. Its ice-free harbor was the perfect departure point for ships carrying troops to Europe and the wounded back home. Its secure Bedford Basin, ideal for assembling convoys laden with war material for the front and relief supplies for civilians. The permanent population swelled to 50,000 by 1917, in addition to thousands of temporary Army and naval personnel at the garrison, Navy yards, and aboard ships. Many civilian newcomers drawn to work at the busy factories and foundries settled in the Richmond neighborhood, overlooking the bustling waterfront, convenient to workplaces and close to schools, churches, and shops. So as the Royal Canadian Navy had virtually no seaworthy ships of its own, the Royal Navy assumed responsibility for maintaining Atlantic trade routes by readopting Halifax as its North American base of operations. In 1915, management of the harbor fell under the control of the Royal Canadian Navy under the supervision of Captain Superintendent Edward Harrington Martin. By 1917, there was a growing naval fleet in Halifax, including patrol ships, tugboats, and minesweepers.
That December morning is cool and clear. You know those sorts of mornings. Halifax is buzzing with life. People heading out to factories and shops, kids walking to school. It's a pretty busy city. The First World War still rages, and Halifax is an important hub and far from danger. At least that's what everyone thought. Just moments after sunrise, out there in the shipping channel, the SS Mont Blanc is arriving. The plan is for it to join a convoy of ships bound for France. On board are explosives meant for the Allies. At the same time, the SS Imo is preparing to make its way to the harbor from a bay where it had anchored overnight. It too is on an urgent mission: carry grain to Belgium. The war there had left people literally starving to death. Across the hull, right there, a big Belgian relief sign. That's supposed to act as a signal to the German submarines not to attack. But the Imo won't even make it to the open ocean. Out of the blue, a steamship cuts across the Imo's path. In a hurry, the pilots agree to pass each other on the right side to avoid a collision. That probably seemed sensible, but they were breaking the rules of navigation, and the Imo is now in the path of oncoming traffic. Remember that cargo ship, the Mont Blanc? It is gingerly moving its way between two packed ferries in these busy waters. There's no way the passengers can know the nearby ship is full of explosives. You see, typically a ship like this would carry a flag warning of its dangerous cargo. But it's wartime. A warning flag would just invite a torpedo attack. So there isn't one. The Imo, still in the wrong shipping lane, is suddenly facing a tugboat towing two long coal barges. The quick-thinking tug captain turns back towards Halifax, but it's too late. The Imo is a bit trapped. It can't correct its course, which means the worst. It is now right in the path of that explosives-laden Mont Blanc. Did the captain see the danger right away? You see, by law, this is the moment when both should reverse their engines, but they don't. The Mont Blanc signals it has the right of way and is staying the course. The Imo signals that it won't yield. Likely very scared, the two captains cut their engines, but the momentum keeps the ships moving forward. So imagine this. The Mont Blanc can't steer to the right. If it does, it might run aground. The whole ship might explode. Instead, the captain makes the only decision he has left: steer the Mont Blanc towards Halifax, right in front of the Imo. And listen to this. That is the sound of the Imo's engines suddenly being thrown into reverse. Too late, though. The ship ends up pivoting in place and rips into the side of the Mont Blanc. The gash is 3 meters long. That opens up several barrels of flammable benzol that spill all over the deck and off the side. Metal grinds against metal. That creates sparks, and the fires start right away, crawling along the deck of the explosives-heavy Mont Blanc. The captain knows how bad this could be and orders his crew to abandon ship. As they flee, rowing furiously towards the Dartmouth shore, those crew members are waving and shouting at nearby ships, just trying to warn everyone to get away. No one seems to understand their warnings. Maybe it's the wind and the distance and the panic. Maybe it's because they're yelling in French. Pretty dramatic scene, the ship on fire. Crowds start to gather, to run to the port to look. Firefighters show up. But they have no idea what the Mont Blanc is carrying below deck. One compartment holds gun cotton. 2 others are filled with TNT. And stored throughout is something called picric acid. That's an extremely dangerous chemical used in the warheads of artillery shells. It's even more powerful than TNT. Basically, the Mont Blanc is a massive bomb waiting to explode. 9:04 a.m. It happens. In an instant, all buildings within 800 meters are destroyed. 1,600 people are killed right away. 9,000 are injured. The acrid smell of smoke and explosives chokes the city. All these years later, the Halifax explosion remains one of the worst disasters in Canadian history. All that loss from small moves, tiny decisions on a clear December day.
Just a little clip of what Halifax looked after the explosion. You see there's rubble, remains, people walking around. Really, really, really just a destructive crisis went on. Just a couple of pictures just to show you and give you a little picture of what it looked like. You see on the top right, somebody painted this painting to show you what the smoke looked like. It's really just a whole cloud. It looks like a tornado. Of the Halifax explosion, there are numerous examples of community strength and resilience. Stories emerged of community members being self-sacrificing, including Jean Groves, who was a telephone operator close to the dock. She stayed behind and began to request nurses, doctors, and firemen. This was despite the building being shattered around her. Joe Gloob, who was uninjured in the explosion, abandoned his initial task of securing his business to help distribute supplies and bring injured people to aid stations. A veterinarian paid house calls to the injured. Supplies also came from the grocery warehouses, which were open to the public. Saulnier remarked that there was amazing improvisation. New roles, new alliances, new rules. Community members also didn't take advantage of the situation. According to the chief of police, there was only one case of burglary following the explosion. Support also came from around the world, including money, supplies, and volunteers. Boston, in particular, was extremely generous. The small conservative community also overcame religious and class differences to help each other. Sectarian differences between Catholics and Protestants were overcome to provide shelter to one another. Weaknesses. There were some cases of the army restricting the freedoms of the local population. There was one report of children being driven out of their home by a soldier. The soldiers also sought to evacuate the children's hospital, but hospital staff resisted. They also guarded devastated zones, which restricted family members from finding bodies or returning for their property. Residents of German origin were harassed, but there wasn't evidence of other forms of persecution. Additionally, there were rumors of looters and ghouls. Ghouls are people who plundered the dead bodies for valuables. Saulnier suggests that these are common urban disaster myths, and it is unclear if this actually happened. Problems and solutions in the short term. Short-term considerations were for the immediate safety of survivors and the injured. This slide shows how the local populace and outside helpers addressed the immediate aftermath. One serious challenge was that a blizzard quickly followed the explosion, and with limited shelter, survivors were creative in where they took refuge. Orphan children were adopted to places all over the continent. As noted earlier, class differences were set aside so wealthier citizens provided shelter for families. Another challenge was that the injured were very busy caring for their families and hadn't been prepared for the disaster. As Halifax was a garrison town, soldiers and sailors were able to provide manpower and came with organizational training. They also were able to work without the distraction of caring for their own families. Warehouses were opened to distribute groceries to survivors. Term considerations. Henry Prince wrote a book on the explosion, and Sawney agrees that this book is considered the opening work for disaster studies. Other improvements included advances in public health, education, and housing. Perhaps more difficult to measure was the increase in citizen involvement and unity in dealing with societal problems. Female employment in certain areas increased, including as conductors on trains. In a similar way to the Titanic disaster, the Halifax explosion had a big influence on maritime standards, laws, treaties, and harbor regulations in an effort to prevent such a tragedy occurring again. Because of the nature of the injuries, there were medical advances in pediatric emergency medicine, ophthalmology, and reconstructive surgery.
What question would you use to generate this coughing? First, I would do the community need assessment to assess the gap and the need that exist within the community and to understand the tragedy's impact on the community resident. As Jennifer asserted, clear data can help to persuade even the most skeptical decision maker, and the data give power. I will raise some topic to discussing like what the issue, what the concern, what the barrier, and the resource. Regarding issue and concern, I will be asked question like what are the felt consequences of this event? Lack of food, lack of electricity, loss of housing? What was affected in our community? How will they affect? Were there injuries or deaths? How widespread were the concerns regarding the tragedy? Regarding the barrier, I would ask, what may oppose effort to solve this problem? Can local organization or government provide supplemental resources? What will lobby for this resource? Can such a resource be involved in an effective manner? What are the other limits on effective prevention treatment? How can the identified barrier be overcome? Regarding the resource, I would ask, what resources are needed? Food, water, clothing, or first aid? What monetary resources are needed? How might such monetary resources be obtained? But if no one contributes anything, I will practice narrative theory. Narrative theory involved three components: the story of self, the story of us, and the story of now. If no one contributes, I will be therefore proceed by sharing the story of my own experience, tying in my personal observation, value, and belief. Then I will be divide participants into small groups of 3 to 4 participants. Ask them to share their thought and experience with each other. At the end of the session, I will bring the group back together and invite individuals and groups to share their experience and to discuss solution or recommendation regarding the opening question. The session will include with a clear, articulate vision, a clear purpose, and one or more compelling story to take action.
So that's the end of our presentation. I hope you all enjoyed. In regards to how our group came to a consensus, how did you problem solve when there were issues to handle? How did you come to decisions about what to do? What leadership styles were reflected in your group decision making? So we basically sent emails and discussed options via email. We usually seem to agree and have consensus around one option, including using a voice over PowerPoint. We use a democratic leadership style. Usually, one person initiated a conversation about a specific issue, and others offered their suggestion until we agreed on a specific course of action. Tasks were always volunteered for rather than being assigned. We worked really great together.